So welcome everybody to this sixth part of the demonstration on the method of Zodiacal releasing from spirit. Today joining me will be Holly, and I'm welcoming her and thanking her very much for uh, being able to use her chart to demonstrate this wonderful method of astrology, ancient astrology, and I will be re-evaluating her chart by means of the things that I explained in previous talks about this method, and then we'll see if it works, because that's what this is all about, right? We want to check whether or not this fantastic material really works in practice. And Holly was kind enough to volunteer her fourth angular triad for us to evaluate with this method. I talked about that one in rather big length in the last demonstration part 5, which showed these interesting angular triads, and this is going to be about the fourth angular triad in Holly's life. So welcome, Holly. Thank you for participating.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. So let's have a look. Well, first of all, of course, please check if this is your chart, because otherwise we have to start again.
Right. Looks pretty good. Yeah, I believe so.
Okay, so that's important. So this is the software Planet Dance by Jean Kremers, a friend of mine, who's really, and it's completely for free, but it's not for Apple Mac computers, I'm sorry to say so. And I believe a lot of Americans use Apple Mac, but I'm not quite sure. But if you do, avail yourself of this software, because it's very helpful in all these ancient traditional methods. So, okay, so this is the chart of Holly. And you can see that the lot of fortune is in Aries, in the Ram. I will be using Hellenistic speech to refer to the images, these signs, but I will also try to use the modern language. But there is a strong tendency when you're following Robert Schmidt's work in astrology to try to use the ancient words for all these astrological factors. So I will try to do that, but I will also use the modern equivalent of them. So we see the lot of fortune, the part of fortune in the Ram, Aries, and we see the lot of the daimon in Leo, in the Lion, together with Mars, which is very interesting. So I will be talking about these things first and check with Holly whether or not she recognizes this stuff. So as you can see, that the lot of daimon is pretty near to the planet Aries, Mars, and Mars itself is partile on the IC, the fourth place, the start of the fourth place in modern astrology, but this is the third place, as the third image as counted from the ascendant, which is has to do with the topics of the third place. But because the IC is there, it's also relevant for the fourth house issues. So, and it's quite important that a lot of the daimon is with the lot of the planet Aries, because this has a lot of impact on Holly's soul, so to speak. So, and because Mars Aries is the ruler of the lot of fortune, that means that fortune events in this life have a very strong effect on Holly's personality and her psyche. But of course, that's an open door, because that's something that's relevant for all of us. All our fortune events have a lot to do with how we develop in life. But here it's specifically strongly indicated simply because Mars is with the lot of the daimon. So it has a big impact. So you can say that Holly's psyche is strongly influenced by these Mars experiences, and they've had a major impact on her soul from an early age on, simply because it's partile on the IC. So, as the IC signifies youth and family life, it's from a very early age on. So even though this Mars is in a Caden place, he's very strong about being partile on the IC. And Veges Valens talks about these specific degrees having to do with the angles, the IC, the MC, the ascendant and the descendant, as mentioned as the notable degrees. So wherever they are, they might be in the 4th place itself, but the IC can also be in the 5th place or in the 3rd place or even the 2nd place. And these are called notable degrees by Veges Valens, indicating that they have a very strong impact on somebody's life. So, so that's the theory behind that. So let's have a look. Each planet, so here it's Mars, in the same image as a lot of the daimon here, the part of spirit, acts as an assistant to it. So, well, the principles of Aries Mars play a major role in holy spiritual and intellectual development from early on. So that's the theory behind it. So let's have a look. So this Mars answers the questions: what drives or drove Holly mainly to do what she does in life? What were the issues, the circumstances, the occasions, or the triggers that spur her into action in early life and perhaps still act as a perhaps unconscious trigger? So how of those actions, so how she reacts to these Mars impulses, have to do with the ruler of the daimon, which is the sun. So he is the indicator of how she tries to deal with all this Mars influence in her early life. Okay, so now that's interesting. But when we look at Mars, this Mars is malefic, not belonging to the sect in favor. For people not quite familiar with this language, this is a day chart, and we can see this by the fact that the sun is above the horizon. So Holly was born during the day, even though it was in the evening, because the sun is almost setting under the horizon, under the descendant, but it's still daytime. So this is a day chart, and the planets belonging to the favorite sect are the day planets, which is Jupiter and Saturn, but not Mars. So Mars is the malefic, not of the sect in favor. And that has to do a lot with the issues that I'm showing here in this chart: fear, intimidation, violence, even challenges, conflicts, and demanding a lot of courage to withstand them. And the usual way in which Mars operates when he's not in control by the native is by separating and severing. So Mars has a tendency to cut things off and pulls things apart. So that's the Greek word mochtas, hardships, difficulty, a certain amount of severity. Can you comment on that, Holly?
Yeah, I'm just sitting here thinking how true all that is. And you know, I have several examples from that time period. I'm sure we'll go through all those, but yeah. Yes, definitely.
And Mars youth. Yeah. And this is stuff just simply happening to you, right? Because of course, when we are very young, we are never actually in a position to decide about everything happening to us.
Right.
Simply things happening to us. So yeah, that must have been pretty severe at times. And I know of a certain example. We will not talk about it yet, but it's a very important one in this period of your life.
Yes.
So Mars, what you can try to include in such a delineation is using the house that in this case Mars rules as a planet testifying to the daimon. And Mars is, of course, the ruler of the 6th place, which might have to do with illness or something, or not being able to be your own authority, I think, which is the place of subservience. And it's also the ruler of the 11th place, which might have to do with the environment, friendships, groups, the groups you might belong to. And of course, everything to do with school and being in school in a group of persons. So, okay, so Holly was kind enough to share something about this early age. And this, of course, was very prominent in the first 19 years of Holly's life, which end when you become 18 years. This is the way of counting. In ancient times, this was said that the period of the sun is 19 years, which ends when you are 18 years of age, but because that is your 19th year. So keep that into account. So, and it breaks off in the next period. And the reason is that Mercury, the ruler of the next period under the Virgin, is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is averse to Mars and averse to the Sun, the ruler of this entire period of the Lion. So whenever we see such an aversion happening between the rulers of two major periods, then we see some sort of breach. So that's the reason why I say it breaks off in the next period, but it remains strongly embedded simply because it's on the IC. But we will get back to the issue of the strength of planets in another slide. So I asked Holly, could you describe this first period of life? And this was what she said about it. It was like living in a tower card environment, and the tower card environment refers to the tarot card of the tower, and I think it's quite illustrative of an Aries environment, which is we can laugh about it now, but it must have been pretty severe at times in Holly's youth. And Holly also said that she moved 11 times in this 19-year period, which is a lot.
Yeah, it really is, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's really very indicative of Mars being on the IC, because it's sort of unstable and also forever changing. You're constantly severed from something you had to grow roots in, or try to get roots in certain phases of your life, or certain environments, of certain places. But then you moved again, and then these ties were severed again. So yeah, that's a pretty accurate description of what Mars can do in such a period. Okay.
Anything? And you know, the tower card is Mars. Did you realize that?
No, I didn't. No.
I didn't realize it when I told you that. I just thought about that when we were.
Wow. Well, how adequate, right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now, let's have a look. Now, I talked about this because this was the first chart where I could really say something about a planet that was in the same image as the lot of the daimon, which is a very important principle. So let's now have a look at the scenario, the several images which will follow one another in the scenario, but also first we have to decide what we can expect, and we have to inspect the support of the chart. It's how it's called by Veges Valens. And well, let's have a look at that. Now, the preliminary evaluation, which is sort of a prenatal analysis. Let's first look at the places. How strong is the punch? And that has to do with the places where the several planets are located. And yeah, this is a pretty strong chart. Perhaps Holly would not agree in view of all the things that happened in her life, but this is a very strong chart, simply because the planets in them are, a lot of them are really located in places that have a big punch. So I try to get them in a certain order. I think the most strong planet is, of course, Mars again, because it's exactly on the IC and exactly in opposition to the MC. So I think that's the strongest. So he has a very big impact whenever he is activated in whatever level of our zodiacal releasing we are, in the first, second, third, or fourth level. And the reason is simply because he is in such a powerful place, simply being on the degree of the IC. And being the malefic node of the sect, he will often probably disturb or sever or whatever he's likely to do, because yeah, that's what Mars does in such a chart. So But fortunately, there are also some very strong planets which are very well situated. And the second one, I guess, is this Jupiter, because he's in the 10th place and he's in its own domicile, the Pisces, which is a big benefic impact. So whenever Jupiter is the ruler of certain periods of time, he will be very beneficent for Holly's career or Holly's development in this scenario. So when we look at the sun, again, the sun is in the 7th place, an angular place, which is, of course, a very strong place. The angular places, Schmidt called them pivotal places. So whenever you find a planet in an angle, which is actually a pivot or a stake, as it's nowadays called, it's a center of movement. So whenever a planet is there, things are centered around that planet. So that's the reason why these planets can be very, very strong, because they are sort of in the middle of things happening, events happening. So that's why they are so important. And having to do with strength, Schmidt said it's not really about strength, it's more about being in the center of attention. So that's something to keep in mind. So again, the third is the sun. It's in its own triplicity because it's the sun in an image belonging to the fiery triplicity. And it's the sec-light. So a sec-light is always very important and very strong. So that's a very important punch that you can get when the sun is activated. And then we find that the fourth is Saturn. Again, Saturn is in its own image, in its domicile, the water pourer, Aquarius nowadays, in the Latin name. But there's also another important angle, it's the MC. So whenever a planet is in as an image where the MC is also, it's also a powerful planet. And it's a good planet because it's in its own domicile, as is Jupiter in Pisces. So that's not bad. You survived everything, right?
Yeah, I really think that is, all those placements is what helped me navigate, get through these things.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah.
Because I've talked to other people and they hear what's happened.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of look at me like, are you okay? Because they expect me to, I think, react differently than, I acknowledge these things were terrible things, but
yeah,
I feel like Jupiter and Saturn and in that sun placement, I don't know, gave me strength to get through it. Or
right. I recently heard somebody in a Dutch podcast refer to the things happening to you in youth, and they were called sacred wounds. And I found that a very, very interesting word to refer to. Traumatic things might happen to us, but they can also be a source of strength and very inspiring also, even though they were pretty heavy things happening to us. So
right,
that sacred wound is a very, very interesting word, I think.
Yeah.
So perhaps that goes for you too as well.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Next in line are the challenging planets. And why are they challenging? Because Mercury, the ruler of your ascendant, and the 4th place, the topic we are talking about now, especially because it's the 4th house triad, it's in the 8th place. That's the dark place of the chart, and people associate it with Scorpio. That's not right, I think, but at least it's a dark house, or a house in the shadows, I believe, a shadowy place. Okay, so things are not quite clear in these
exactly
places.
That's how I describe it. Not clear.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
No direction.
Yeah,
no direction.
Exactly. Yeah. And of course, Venus, the ruler of the 12th place, is in the 6th place in its anti-domicile, the Scorpion. So yeah, that's also a challenge. I always find it very interesting that there is sort of a conundrum in each chart, because when you have the sun in the 7th place, then relationships ought to be the main focus of somebody's life, in the sense that it's something where the action goes, simply because that's what the sun does, indicates action. So the action of the seventh place has to do with relationships, on one-on-one contact with other people. And then the conundrum is, then why should Venus then be in such a place where it's quite difficult for a person to understand what relationships actually are about? This is a Venus that has a lot of issues with trying to find out, but what is love actually? That's a film, right? Love Actually. That was, but that's the sort of a conundrum, but also a sort of I cannot find the English word. It's sort of a quest, perhaps, because Venus needs to find out, I don't know how to do Venus, because I'm in such a difficult environment, because the ruler of Venus is, of course, our friend Mars. So
a lot of challenges.
Right. And then the sun in the seventh says, but you will be okay. But it's simply a quest for you to find out how all this stuff is working. And then there's also this sacred wound idea about, but Mars really had a very difficult start in trying to understand what relationships were actually meant to be. So see, that's interesting. So, and then we have an in-between place, the fifth, where your moon is. It's also a very important planet by being, of course, being female. It's often said that the moon has a stronger relationship with females than with male charts. I don't agree with that, but there we have it. Okay, let's have a look further. So these are all the periods, the major periods, so the L1 periods of the scenario. And when we try to evaluate purely on basis on the major ruler of each period, how we need to see how strong the impact is of each period. So when I look at these two guys, the Leo period, the Lion period, and the Scorpion period, they must be strong. Why? Well, because Mars is on the IC. It's the strongest planet, I think, in this complete chart. So these periods must have been very strong, which is not to say that they are very good necessarily, simply because when you look at the Scorpion period, which is, of course, after your fourth house triad, then we see that Venus is there, which is also a planet not of the sect, getting really messed up, I think, by Aries, the planet ruling this Venus. So, but it's also a period of trying and finding out things and trying to establish something going on with having to do with relations as a preparation for the seventh house period. So that's interesting, but that should be perhaps another talk when you are really in your seventh house period, which is within a period of 2 years now.
Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah, 3 years almost. Yeah, 2 years, 2.5. Yeah, because you will see why that's so interesting. Now, we're back at the fourth house now, fourth house period.
Okay.
Which is challenging. Why? Because we find Mercury being in the 8th place. And well, that's of course a place of trying to find out, trying to get to your roots. But these roots are really sort of in the dark somehow. So this is a quest in a sense of trying to get to grips with all this stuff that happened to you in the first period, I think. Of course, this is something that happens to everybody who's what you call in the puberty, because we then need to try to find out, well, who am I, what's my place in the world, etc. It's all natural as well, but here we find it exemplified by where the planets are and how they indicate things about this period. So, okay. Then we have the mixed blessing of the Libra period, the scales, where we find the moon. And why is it mixed blessings? Because we find the ruler of the scales, which is Venus, which is in aversion to this place. So I have some interesting things to say about that when we get to this period in the coming slides, because this was also a very good period for you in a sense. Okay, now here we got a double whammy, which is the period you were hoping to arrive as soon as possible, because there we have the sect light, the sun, and it's ruled by Jupiter, which is a planet of the sect in favor, which is in the 10th place, which is in its own image. Wow, you can't get any better than that. So
is this my reward?
Yeah.
For surviving?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
You're gonna be. It's gonna be, to quote our friend, the president. It's gonna be great. Right?
Oh no, no, please.
And then we come to Capricorn again, and that will be a mixed blessing in the sense that Mercury, of course, being there is an important planet, but it's also the fortune 10th. But I will explain that in the next slide. So, yeah, okay. Now, again, another analysis, a preliminary evaluation is looking at the triplicity rulers of the sect light. Okay, so these are the triplicity rulers. I already said that the sun is above the horizon, so we have a day chart. And the sun is in a fiery sign, so these are the triplicity rulers. Now, again, I show you how this is shown in the software Planet Dance. I can really endorse this software because it has such a great traditional module in it, made by he called himself Ed Greek, I believe, the Ed Greek horoscope, which is really amazing. So, but enough of that. Let's get back to the triplicity rules. And as you can see, we have the sun as the first triplicity ruler, Jupiter being the second, and Saturn being the third. And again, these are very strong places for these planets to be. So there, as Valens would say, there is strong support in this chart.
Thank goodness.
Sorry?
Thank goodness.
Yeah. That's yeah. Okay. I will not. So when we look at the first period, that's a bit of an interesting take, because how Valens used this was to try to evaluate the life in two parts. The first part of life being determined by the first triplicity ruler, and the second one by the second one, and the third one needs to assist. It's not the third period of your life for the in Hellenistic astrology. This is a grand approach delineation, dividing the life in two big chunks and then trying to evaluate how good the life is going. So these two actually say that it should have been really very good in both these periods of your life. And we now know that the first period might have been good. You were a strong person, you still are, even in those days, but the delineation is not completely correct in the Valens terminology, because he will say, well, the first period is good and the second one is even better, perhaps, because Jupiter is in its own image. But we know now that Mars also played a very important role, but that's the reason why I'm thinking that this might not be quite as adequate in the sense of the way Valens used this method. But we can now understand why, because the first period of life was strongly influenced by the malefic node of the sect being Mars. So, but again, you survived everything, and that's perhaps testimony of this first triplicity ruler being the sun. And the second period ought to be as good as the first one. Again, there we have the double whammy, because in this period, both triplicity rulers will be managing the period of this life. So we can hardly wait, right? This one. And then we get to the third period, which is under Capricorn, the goat horn one. And that's Saturn, the third, ruled by Saturn being the third triplicity ruler, who is himself in aversion to Capricorn, the goat horn one. But Saturn is supporting the sun, the first triplicity ruler, and is in aversion to the second one. So we might expect that there is a sort of a continuation, because Schmidt said that it is best when the third triplicity ruler is supporting the first one, because then it's a sort of a manifestation of a continuation of what was happening in
Oh, well,
the
good.
strength of the first period, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So here it is, the dividing the life in two periods. Should be a strong and good period, and the second one also. Well, the tension of both periods can be seen perhaps by the first period being marred by Mars conjunct IC. And don't forget that Mars is supplied by the sun, right? So as I explained in the previous webinar on for Acuta's website and his speaker series, it's actually the sun is the host for Mars being the guest in the lion. So Mars has to deal with everything that the sun is providing him with, which is seventh house issues, which is authority issues, etc. So that's what's going on with that Mars. And the second period, again, angular, very strong, but it's in square relation with the first triplicity ruler. So there must be some sort of breach perhaps in the second period, which was not perhaps bad, because we will get to the signification of these configurations that planets have with each other in another slide, because they are very important. Okay, the second one is eminence. Interesting. So you might yet become a famous person.
Really?
I'm not sure. No, I'm not sure, because they have
No,
to
I
do
know.
with status. Eminence has to do with persons of interest, which is not necessarily an indication of that you become famous, but
Right.
perhaps you have a certain impact on your environment or from the position that you have in life. So,
Sure.
So that might have to do with what's coming up in the Bowman period of Sagittarius. So, okay, the fortune houses, because that's our third evaluation of a chart. Again, it's very interesting because we see that the moon is in the fortune 7th place and Mercury is in the fortune 10th place, which are very, very punch rich, strong places to be. So whenever they come into play, there might be something going on that's very important in the life, which might have to do with promotion, getting further ahead in life with a strong wind in your back, so to speak. So that's interesting, which is also the case for the third period that we will be investigating in this talk, which is the period of the balance, where the moon is. That's interesting. So, and then after the double whammy period of the Bowman, then we find the Capricorn period, and that's also the 10th place relative to fortune itself. So I'm very interested in what will be the harvesting of in that period of your life, Holly, because that will follow the angular place of the 7th place. So that's interesting. So who knows how far you can go, right?
Yeah. Hopefully we can talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah, we will have to do another interview later in life.
Yeah.
And all this is happening. So let's hope we can do that. Okay, now another important thing to evaluate in this method is the aversions between certain images and certain ruler of images. So when we look at this, in this scheme in the middle of the chart, you see again the planet dance version of it. And you can see there are quite some planets that are unconnected with each other, which whenever these periods follow one another, they indicate certain breaches with the previous period, simply because there's no relations between them. And not necessarily a big breach or something dramatic, but it could be something that is cut off or left behind. So, well, I'm not interested in that anymore. So don't take it too seriously, but it might indicate some sort of disconnection from one period to another whenever they follow each other. So that's important to keep in mind. So But I must also say that the word disharmonious, as it's called in this table and its modern parlance, is a relative concept, because we also have what's called a superior position. And you can see in Holly's chart, in the graph that's on the left side of this slide, you can see that there are quite some planets that have a 10th house position relative to other planets, which is very important, because whenever a planet is in superior position, it's very strong in relation to the other planet. And that can be either good or can be not so good. And I will show you what this concept is, but let's first keep the word decimation. It's a bit of a threatening term, but it actually simply means that the planet that is in superior position diminishes the strength of the one in the inferior position, which is also the 4th place from it. I hope it's clear what's meant with superior position. If you count, let me try to do that with a pointer. I'm going to use this one. When you look at Venus here, and you count from Venus, the place where she is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, then you can see that the Mars is in the 10th place relative to Venus. And that's the superior position. So it's almost as if Mars, in this case, is in the MC relative to Venus. And that is what the superior position actually entails. So you can see another one here, the Moon is in superior position to Mercury, because it's Mercury, the Moon is in the 10th place relative to Mercury here. And we have Venus again, Venus being in superior position to Saturn, because Venus is in the 10th place relative to Saturn. And then we have, of course, our other fine example. We have the Sun, it's in the 10th place relative to Jupiter. So these are all pretty good indications why. And the interpretation depends on the planets doing this. For this superior position, it's not so good. It's called maltreatment. Mars is maltreating Venus, because Mars is very strong in its signification relative to Venus being the planet in inferior position in this scheme of delineation. So that means that Venus is really beat up by Mars, to use modern parlance. So,
and that explains the current period I'm in.
Yes.
It's so difficult.
Oh, right,
yes.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
And do you also see some links with, because Mars is very important in the first period of your life, do you see links with that period?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's, yeah, okay. That's evident, right?
Right.
Okay, so yeah, I'm sorry for that, but the other planets are very good.
Yeah, that's okay. I can do it.
yeah, because you're a strong person, right? The chart
Right.
says so, so you cannot deny that. Okay, now superior position is also via a trine configuration. Again, there are some very fine ones. You have Mars trine to the Sun, the Moon trine in trine with Saturn, and Venus trine Jupiter. So, okay, these are very good positions. Okay, the tables I'm showing here are also from this fantastic program Planet Dance. Maltreatment by overcoming. So here you see what's happening. You see, for example, in this, again, I will use this. Here you see the one used. Mars is overcoming Venus. So Venus is maltreated by being overcome by Mars. And here you see Mars is maltreated. Why? By overcoming by Saturn, and that has to do with this opposition, of course. So these two are in opposition to each other, and that's a form of maltreatment. So Mars is maltreated by Saturn, and it goes both ways. Saturn is also maltreated by Mars. So there we have the indication by what is meant by maltreatment. But we also have bonification by overcoming. So when you look at Venus, Nope, I miss. Oh, here it is. Yeah. If you look at this, you see that Jupiter and Venus have a trine because they go from two water-like images, Scorpion to Pisces. So Venus is a bonification for Jupiter. So that's a good place and a good delineation resulting from it. And here you have bonification by beneficent position. The example is a bit off because the sun is strong as it is. So suppose, and now this is an example not from this chart, but suppose that the sun would be in the 6th place, which is not a good position for the sun, when then it was Jupiter, the ruler of the sun, being in the 10th place, that would be a bonification by beneficent position. So then the position of the sun in this example in the 6th would be overcome or helped by the fact that the ruler of it is in a beneficent position. So these are the significations of all these several things. I will not go into that further, but it's good to know that this preliminary evaluation is very extensive in ancient literature, and it should be taken into account because you can, when you do not account for these things, you can misjudge what's happening in a certain period. So that's the reason why I'm presenting it here. So, okay. Now we come to the major periods again, the changes. I talked about these in the other videos, but now I will try to show it how this can be seen in this method and the changeover of the major periods of this first angular triad in Holly's life. I think that this is actually the strength of this method because it's simply explains why certain things become very important in a certain period, why some things simply disappear out of somebody's life or get a different slant on it, simply by being in a different configuration or a configuration that actually says, now this planet is now not used in this period, etc., etc. So let me show that. So let's first have a look at what changes might be the motivation or approach to life, to whatever is happening to a person. Why is that? Because we get new chronocrates. So here we have the sun, and the sun is in a trine. In the ancient parlance, this is said as the sun can see its own image, which is the lion, and therefore it's the acting manager of the acting domicile master for the lion. So that's okay. So the first approach to things in Holly's life is the sun, which is also very basic because it's her basic approach to things happening in her life. This is her way of dealing with everything that happens. Why? Because it's the ruler of the lot of the daimon. I have not gone into a very specific delineation of the Lord of the Diamond, but that's also a very important step in delineating the lot of the diamond in somebody's life. And perhaps I will do some videos on that topic as well, because they are very, very interesting in describing how a person acts in his or her life in general. This is very interesting. Okay. The second period is ruled by Mercury, and indeed Mercury is of course the ruler of Holly's first place, the ascendant, but it's also trying to the Virgin, the second period of in this scenario. So yeah, Mercury was the way to approach life in this period. And then in the third period, we should have gotten Venus as being the ruler of this period. And of course it is, but it's in aversion to its own image, the scales, the Libra, so we have to look for a joint domicile master. Now the first one is always, I explained this in a previous video, the first who comes into view is always the exaltation ruler of the image, in this case being the scales, Libra, and the exaltation lord of Libra is of course the Kronos, Saturn. So we have to check whether or not Kronos can see its image, the scales, Libra. And yes, it can, because there's a trine between them. So what we now see is that the managing director of this period is Saturn and not Venus. Venus is, of course, very important, and I will show you why. But because there's something very important going on with planets being averse. And of course, the moon is in this image. So the moon is also very important as a manager for handling things happening in this period in life. Okay, so let's have a look at what's important about an averse planet. In the second webinar, I said something about the term oikeiosis, and that's something that has to do with what I'm trying to say here about averse planets. Venus historically has provided for Libra as being a sort of Venus-like place. So Libra will always remain a Venus environment for the moon or for whichever planet is in that place. But because the Venus is in aversion to in this chart, and solely in this chart, Venus does not manage the issues of the fifth place. Later we will see that this might have had a relation with childbirth, but let's also have a look at it further. So this moon is in Libra, is in a Venus environment for sure, but Venus offers no help in this period or guidance for the moon, simply because she's averse to her own place. And remember, the fifth place is the joy also of Venus. So there might be artistic inspiration simply because it's the fifth place of a Venus-like nature, really, simply because Libra is a Venus-like image. So, of course, it is a Venus-like environment having to do with artistic things, etc. Now, the moon might get advice from the acting manager, which is Saturn, but because the moon is in superior position to Saturn, she will overrule his information, his influence. So that's an interesting thing to have a look into. But you can perhaps also ignore him because she is separating with her contact with him. So, which in the ancient parlance is called no testimony. So the question is, how strong is this Saturn influence for the moon itself? But it might also indicate a Saturnine art form or expression, simply because Saturn is the one dealing with the fifth place issues. So I hope this will give some insight in how to an averse planet is not the manager of a certain place, but it still has the characteristics of the normal dispositor of a certain image. So the fifth place, being Libra, indeed still has Venus-like significations, but in this chart, Venus is not the manager of this place. So that's the difference between when a planet is in averse to its image, can see its image or cannot see its image. And in this case, Venus cannot see its own image, so it has nothing to say about the fifth place. Even though that the fifth place still has some Venusian characteristics, simply because it's Libra who is the planet allotted the fifth place as its due. Okay, did I make that clear, Holly?
Yeah, and it's got me thinking about my chart ruler being an aversion, Mercury. Mm-hmm. So what do you do in that case? Because is there an exalted ruler for Gemini? I mean, Virgo, Mercury is. What do you do in that case?
We will get to that because I will address that.
Okay.
Because it's an interesting period in
yeah. Okay.
Okay. So again, we try to see what are the headlines for this period, because each period now has a certain ruler and what's going on in these periods. Now, and these are, of course, very general delineations and expressions about what each period signified. So you said very acutely how my identity was shaped through relationships. And that's the sun in the 7th place, in a tower card environment being Mars. Yeah, well, it's really clear.
Yeah.
And the second period, which is Mercury, being in aversion to that, being in trine to the Virgin, making my own home, 4th place, a 6 of Swords feel. How would you describe this chart in the general?
The whole chart, or
Yeah,
that?
the 6 of Swords.
Oh, you want me to describe that feeling of that?
Yeah,
that
what does a tarot card, the 6 of Swords, signify?
So, okay, so yeah, during that period, it was like I was left to my own, to find my own way. Yet it kind of reminds me the guy that's guiding the boat. I can't see him. Those people can't see him. It kind of reminds me of Mercury, the planet that, but trying to leave a challenging environment to find something calmer,
Right. Yeah.
But yet still kind of blind. Still.
Yeah.
So.
But which is very significant for Mercury being in the 8th place, right?
Right.
You cannot see, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Now, when we look at the 3rd period, we talked about this before, so I know some things about it, but this was a very interesting one because you got into creative expression through photography. Very interesting. Can you say more about that?
I did quite, yeah.
How did you come about starting doing photography?
I always had an interest in it. I don't know. It really got strong during that period. And I don't know, I became quite good at it. It could have been a full-time job, actually. So.
Interesting. But again, I need to ask, so what?
Sure.
What happened? Why did you not get into a decent, that's not the right word, sorry. Why did you not use that as your interesting possible career?
Okay. Why did I not take that chance, that leap of faith, and just,
Yeah.
And I there was a point I actually, and it may have been during this time. Yes, it was. Okay. There was a point actually where the place I worked closed, and it was like a pivot moment, like, okay, am I going to do this? Am I going to put everything into this photography and just do this? But no, I felt like it was that Saturn influence. And isn't Saturn the exalted ruler of that Libra? I felt like, no, you better get a full-time job with benefits and blah, 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 that should stuff. You should do this.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
For a slide that will be coming up.
Yeah.
I think Saturn is a very important planet for you.
It is. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Again, okay. Now, change in motivation or approach, because we get a new chronometer. So, yeah, this is simply what I published in previous videos. Each planet has its own specific talent for managing or supervising things. So that's what I'm using here as a possible take on, well, what's the most important thing in your approach to life. And we can differentiate that by the first period, because then the sun rules it. And the second one is Mercury, because it rules the second period of this triad. Well, Mercury destabilizes and contests. He's the intellectual approach, smart, adroitness, but also debating and wrestling with stuff. Mercury in ancient literature is a bit of a suspect planet because, well, we associate a lot of good things with it, but it's also a planet that keeps things in the air and has to do with keeping things unclear in a sense. So that's sort of a debate. You're always in opposition to somebody else's ideas of how things are. And Mercury has the tendency to debate everything and any stable position that people have or arguments that people might have. Mercury is a bit of a a nuisance sometimes in that sense. He tries to debate everything. So yeah. Okay, and then we get to the third period, and now I'm taking Saturn, of course, as being the planet that actually deals with all this stuff. Now, first you have the moon, and the moon is, of course, a planet being the planet that experiences things and is touched and is moved and has concerns and is caring, but also worrying, etc., etc. And that's a very important thing in this period of your life, in the Libra period, and also establishing a home, simply because that's one of the significations, the most general significations of the moon, starting a family, etc. So that's important. How does the moon take care of things? She is the one with careful attention, the anticipatory, the dreamlike, the caring approach. But we also have, of course, Saturn, the planet that excludes and rejects, which has to do with perhaps the stoic approach of life. Don't take risks, which what you said about your photography career at that point, at that period, but discipline and patience, but also duty, perhaps, and not taking risks, etc. Yeah.
And starting over, starting from scratch, that really applies.
Yeah. That's Saturn. Yeah. Okay. Again, one of the things I introduced in the webinar with Cuta is the interesting concept of oikeiosis, the guest-host relation. What stuff does a planet supply for a planet that's the guest in its domicile? So that has to do with building material and circumstances. So let's have a quick look at that. When we look at the fourth place, angular triad, you can also say what's on offer, in the sense that the domicile ruler of a certain image has to do with what's presented to a planet that is the guest there. So we have Mars in the first place, and something is presented to this Mars to have his way with it. So, and what is presented, we can see that by the ruler of the domicile of the lion, because that is the host for Mars in this case. So what's on offer? It's the seventh place issues. So it has to do with relations. It has to do with how you deal with other people. And Mars is not a very good dealer with other people because he likes to be in conflict with them, and Mars has to do with severing and things being torn apart and things divided, etc. So that's actually sort of the opposite of the what the seventh place tries to do, to get into touch with people and try to harmonize with people. And Mars is not a good planet for doing that because it's not his way to do things. So
yeah.
Okay, so that's what's on offer in the first issue. And yeah, Mars has to do with a certain feeling, because in one of the presentations I said that planets have a receptive side, which is the side of the soul, to say, and then Mars feels things by means of fear, and that's a way of attracting attention to something. So Mars has to do with intimidation, violence, perhaps challenges, conflicts, but also with courage. So that's the, let's say, the emotional side of Mars, how he experiences things, right? And of course, Mars also, when he's the ruler of a certain image, also has a certain way of dealing with things. But this is more about how Mars experiences things, because he's in the place of the lion. Okay, the second period is, of course, the eighth place issues, and that's material for, I think, Mercury himself, because there is no planet in the Virgin in your chart. So I think that Mercury is left to his own devices to try to deal with everything. And that's two things: interest, curiosity, searching, trying to get to a certain idea or certain conclusion about things. It's a quest, perhaps debating things, wrestling with things, rationalizing them, but also perhaps writing about it or studying them. So that's what Mercury normally does. And here is a bit in the dark, simply because he's in the eighth place, so that could be soul searching or something of the kind. having to do, of course, with fourth place issues, where the Virgin herself is acting, because that's what her lot is in your life, because that's what allotted to the fourth place by being the image of the Virgin. Okay, now let's have a look at the third place. Now, when I use Venus, which is actually perhaps not quite right because Venus is in a Virgin, I'm not sure if Venus is hosting sixth place issues as material for the moon, but you also said something about your first child, I believe.
Right. He was born during that period.
Yeah. And were there sixth place issues involved in that?
I'm thinking. You mean in regards to
having a child?
Well, there was some difficulties, actually, if we think of health.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was some difficulties. I didn't even, we had some infertility issues.
Okay.
So you might say that, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's it's not nice, but it's interesting.
Yeah. Okay.
Astrologically, right? Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Now we have the moon in the in the fifth place, that being the third period of this zodiacal releasing scenario. These are the things the moon has: being touched, having concerns, receiving, storing, etc., etc. That's nice, but let's have a look at what Saturn does, because Saturn hosts 9th and 10th place issues as material for the moon in Libra, who deals with them. That's interesting, because you said that this was a period where you discovered or developed your photography, which had also very strong ties with a sort of a second profession. Could have been your first profession, but as Saturn deals with things, he says, no, don't do it.
Yes, exactly.
Choose certainty. No,
yeah.
Okay. Okay, so this is for everybody who's watching this. This is the way how you can proceed with all these several periods of life in a person's life. So now this is going to be perhaps a more interesting piece of information, because this is the first time that I'm presenting this here, because I have a live example here, this is what I call the strength of this method, because you see things changing. Now, and how do you see these changes? You see these changes because of the configurations and aspects that the ruler of the first period had, which changes because there's a new ruler of the second period. So we have to see what changes in the relations between these two major period chronocrates. So for the first period, it's the sun, and the aspects of the sun are listed there. And then you have to see how they change when the period comes to a new chronocrator, who's now the manager of this entire period. And there's a change, because you can see that the sextile that the sun has with the moon becomes a square with Mercury and the moon. And that's something different, okay? You see also that the aversion of the sun with Venus becomes a sextile with Mercury, the new ruler of this period. And so you can evaluate all the aspects between planets. And that's so interesting, because now you can say that the moon becomes more challenging, simply because it now has a square configuration with the new chronocrator, Mercury. And interesting also, Venus makes an appearance. Why? Because in the first period, there was an aversion between the sun and Venus, and now there's a sextile between the new chronocrator Mercury and Venus. So you see, there's things are changing. And I said in my Dutch book on this, what explains something that was so important in a certain part of your life simply disappearing in a second part of your life? What explains this? Well, something that was so important for you in this first period, why is it of no consequence in the second period, or even the third period, or whatever period? And this is an explanation for it. So here you see also the second place, which is a good news, is that Mars disappears. Now, of course, Mars can never really disappear simply because he's on the IC.
Yeah.
So he has a very big imprint on whatever was happening in Holly's life in the first period. So that remains, but he is somehow of less consequence for this period because the ruler of this new period has no contact whatsoever with this Mars. So you see, that's a very interesting way to try to check what's going on in somebody's life, but also to characterize the differences between the first period and the second period. So that's, I'm not sure, I have never met or seen any method that does this so interestingly, so consequently also, because it's so obvious, I think.
I like this. I like it. It gives you a really good feel of the period.
Right, yeah. And also, because we have sub-periods as well, you can try to see in which period under this virgin period, when does this manifest so strongly. So when you look at the moon is activated in the Libra period, and it's activated, of course, when we come to the crab period, the Cancer period, simply because the moon rules Cancer. So perhaps you can see, I'm not sure if you can recollect the Holly, but this is what I do with these periods. I first check, so what's happening in these periods. So the moon might become more challenging. So in which periods might this manifest? And then I look at these sub-periods when the moon has a big say in what's happening in these sub-periods. So these are the periods. So the first one is in 1983, which is an 8-month period. It's not that long. And the crab period is quite long because the crab has 25 months under its rule. So perhaps something can be said about these periods. I'm not sure if you recollect, but
well, I do recollect the 1983 period, that spring of 83. I had switched schools in the spring. A boyfriend comes back into my life, and actually moves to the college and starts school where I had transferred to.
Okay.
And we eventually marry. And I mean, I do feel like that was a challenging time in ways, or too. So
it's interesting that this has to do with the relation, right?
Right,
because,
right.
Again, it's the moon starting a family in a sense, which starts, of course, with getting married or moving in a house together.
Right, right.
And
let's see. Yeah, and it was, of course, Venus is the ruler, and then I don't know. It was difficult, but mixed, I would say too, kind of. Now that Cancer period, I can't really. Nothing stands out for me on that one.
Okay. Well, let's have a look at the next one. Venus makes an appearance. There she is again. No, she makes an appearance. So that's exactly the same period as we talked about, 1983, the boyfriend who you married. Yeah. Venus makes an appearance also in the Scorpio period. There we have our friend Mars, of course, as ruler of this entire period, which might indicate what? Some sort of breach, because, well, no, I'll not go into that, because the Taurus period, 1993, then again a Taurus period after losing of the bond, just before it moves over to the third period. Yeah. Now you don't have to search for examples, but it's more to illustrate, well, this is what you can do with it. You see what happens with a certain planet, and then you can also chart out which periods of this entire period, which is a long one of 20 years, where this perhaps might be manifest itself and seen more clearly. So the same goes for Mars, etc. So, okay, the other ones you can. Now, here the third period, as we said before, now Saturn takes over because Venus is in aversion to the sign of the Libra, the scales. So what changes now? Again, some interesting stuff, because I'm not using Venus now as the ruler of this image, the manager of Libra, but I take Saturn. Why do I do that? Because it's the one who could see the exaltation ruler of Libra, and it can see its own image. So here we have the moon coming back, not being so difficult, but more supportive, because now the moon is in trine to the ruler of the set period. So the interesting thing is that this is more harmonious, of course, than in the previous period, where the moon and the ruler of the period were more challenging to each other. So here we see the moon and Saturn being supportive for each other. Now again, Mars reappears and is challenging. Why is that? Because it's in opposition to Saturn, which is not an easy thing to deal with. And this might have, again, to do with something changes, something is severed. And you said there was a job.
Oh, right.
Right?
Yeah.
And then you chose again for the certainty of a regular job, I think.
Yeah, I'm looking at my notes and kind of comparing. I think you're talking about that L2 Capricorn period where Mars and, that was difficult.
Okay.
That's when I lost a job I had for 15 years, a lot of stability and security.
Yeah.
That was a huge loss. And shortly, that was just right after that, my stepmother died, my grandmother died, more support people died. I divorced during that period. That was
the Capricorn period under Libra?
Yes.
Okay. Where Mercury is, the planet of keeping things in the air. Yeah. Okay. Wow. But that's interesting. Okay. So again, here we have a very interesting difficulty, because one might suggest, well, we have to look at Venus, but that's not what I'm doing. I'm looking at the actual manager and director of Libra, which is in this case Saturn, the exaltation ruler, who can see that image. So I evaluate a Libra period with Saturn and less with Venus. But as I said, the fifth house environment is, of course, a Venusian environment, simply because Venus is the fifth place is the joy of Venus. And here it's strengthened by the fact that it's actually a Venus-ruled image that has the fifth place as its due. So that's interesting.
You see all that severing, cutting, that Mars energy, destroying. The Saturn starting over. I had to start over and work my way up in another job,
Wow. Yeah.
A new home and all that. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. But the interesting thing is, I'm getting ahead a bit of myself, but again, here we see the difficult things. 2002, there's Mars again in opposition with Saturn. Do you have any memory of that period, 2002?
Okay, what period are you talking about? In 2002?
For 15 months in a row.
This is still the Libra,
Libra Scorpio period. Yeah.
Oh, Scorpio. Okay, Libra Scorpio. Why don't I have anything on that?
Okay.
I didn't have anything written down for that, and I can't really. Yeah. I don't really recall anything, but.
The interesting thing is that one might say, and that's perhaps a bit, I'm not sure in what extent this is true, but when a benefic is in a malefic place, then it might assuage the difficulties of the place. So that might be an indication why there's nothing dramatic going on in this period.
It stands out. Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah. Okay, so there we have our Jupiter in that place with the sun again supporting.
I would say that, those are probably more of a period where that photography is peaking.
Yeah. We had, of course, some email contact, and I said, working with light is such an interesting thing about photography. And that has to do with moods of the moon. And the moon is, of course, also the thing having to do with photography, because the moon is a sensitive plate, as we call it in Dutch, a gevoelige plaat. and that's very interesting. But also, when you really did it when the sun was the ruler of the period in this longer period, the L2 period, that's also working with light. So that's a very interesting concept, and something you can be very good at when the Jupiter, the Sagittarius period arrives. So yeah, working with light. Yeah, that's think of the sacred wound, right? Working with
Right.
light.
Right.
So yeah. Now here's something interesting, because Saturn takes over rulership, and so the question is, who is this Saturn? Now we have to look at your chart again, because when we look at your ascendant, we see that Mercury is an aversion to the ascendant. So then we get two possibilities. There is no exalted ruler. So we look whether or not Venus can see its image, the image of Gemini, and it cannot. So the only planet left is then Saturn. So Saturn can see the image of the Gemini, the twins. So I think Saturn might be a very interesting planet representing you. And I think there's a certain amount of evidence for it, because this is what you told me of this period. So we had a very bad period before this, 2004, a lot of people dying that were very dear to you. A lot of things changed. And then came this period, and this is what you said about it. You bought a house, and we're talking about the fourth angular triad, right? Buying a house.
Right.
Started dating a guy who was probably not my dad's choice. The fourth place is associated with both parents, right? And some astrologers say it's the mother, but others say it's the dad. Now, in the ancient literature, it was both. But okay, it was not your dad's choice, but he was the best partner you ever had. So that's good. And this was the first time I just did what I wanted. Hey, that sounds like the rule of the first place coming into its own in a sense, because it's in its own image, but it's also with the MC. And the MC has to do with your place in society and becoming your own person, and etc., etc. And you felt rebellious. Wow. Yeah, okay. You relied more on yourself, and in the spring of 2008, you married him, and you became independent for the first time. Wow. This really sounds a lot like the ruler of the first place in Aquarius, in the water pourer, and coming into your own, sort of, right?
Yeah.
So this is a very supportive, strong period of your life. So I think a planet representing you, of course, there might be more candidates, but I think this one is also very important, this Saturn, especially for this period, right? Because this is also a very important period having to do with turning points. We will get to that in the next installment of this video series, where I will be looking at each period separately, but also the turning points in them, and try to get a view on what's happening in each of these periods in your life. So, but this was a very interesting one, simply because this had to do with you, becoming independent in your life for the first time. That's very interesting, right? So,
yes.
do you remember anything more about this period?
Well,
Sorry.
Let's see here. In 2006. I don't know. It was just more a sense of freedom, that, and what, I've always been pretty independent, but what I meant by that in particular was of my father, of his influence, independent of his influence,
Okay.
So.
Yeah, that's important. Yeah. That's what having to do. It's interesting because Saturn is, of course, in opposition with Mars, and Mars is strongly related to everything having to do with your past and the persons who are very of much interest in that period. So, yeah, that's very, very important. Yeah. Okay. Well, now I come to the last slide of this presentation, because again, it's for the general public, and getting a sense of what you can do with this method of angular triads and also the periods that follow one another in this scenario, you can see how the ruler of each period is relating itself to the new ruler of the next period. So if you can look at this first and the second one, you can see that must have been a breach simply because the Mercury is in aversion to the ruler of this first period of the lion. So somehow there is a breach happening in that period simply because they do not see each other. So they, yeah, how can you say this? They do not flow over into each other in a certain particular way. So it's just simply breaking off and go in another direction, sort of. I'm not sure if you can relate to that, but yeah.
Well, so you're saying between the Leo period and the
right.
the first and second. So when the first hands off to the second.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I just felt like both of those periods were pretty difficult. You know, I had well, we didn't go through all the examples, but you know what they are.
Yeah. We will get to that in the next. But what's interesting is, when it's a breach, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily a bad one or a good one. Although with Mercury in the 8th place, it's certainly different from the first place, which has the ruler in the 7th place. So,
right. A lot of uncertainty is just how I felt. Like I'm just like thrown out there in the world, like to find my own way, that type of. Yeah,
that's really indicative indeed of Mercury being in the 8th place. Which is a difference with the self-assuredness, perhaps, of the sun being in the 7th place and in a strong image of the bowman, right? So that's a difference. Yeah,
I did feel a little more confident in that first period, even though that was challenging. I felt like I had some support. That second period, no.
Yeah. Now, when we get to the next one, again, this is the wrong one in a sense, because when we look at Venus and Mercury, we can say, well, that must have been an easy transition. But we have also established that that Venus is not the managing director of Libra of this third period, because it's Saturn. And Saturn is again in aversion to Mercury, the previous period ruler. So again, we see some sort of breach, some sort of things happening which have to do with not following exactly what happened before, but a new perspective or perhaps a new approach to things, which must have been now the Saturn-like approach.
Yes, because during that period, the overall, like if I had to give a short description, it was kind of like, okay, now this is what you should do. This is what you should do.
Okay. Very good, which is typical of Saturn, right?
Yeah.
Let's not doubt, let's make a decision and let's follow these rules and this
be more
protocol.
Responsible.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah. Okay. And just having a small look ahead, when we get then to the next period, the 4th period of your life, then we come to the Scorpion, and the Scorpion is indeed in touch with its own image. It can see it, and it's also in opposition. So again, sort of a breach, because now they are in opposition, and then there's really something else happening, right?
Yeah, a lot of stuff. It's a lot of Mars stuff.
Again, it's sort of revisiting Mars in a sense, right?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Well, this was my presentation for this. It will be continued because I hope you're still game, Holly. Holly.
Sure.
Yeah, because I will then try to get a grip on the periods separately, which turning points are happening in each of them, and if we can see them manifesting in your life and how you are related to them, experiencing them. So
the next video will go over more of the details of each period.
Right.
Okay, yes.
Check them
I
out.
think that'll explain a lot of things.
Yeah, because and then they need to be watched in tandem, right? because this is interesting, but this was more of a survey of how this is how you go about them.
Okay, yes.
You've seen some examples in your life as to how appropriate these significations were. So again, thank you, Holly, for providing all this information. And
thank you.
Look, you're very welcome. So the next time we continue with this live example chart from Holly, we will go into the idea of sowing, growing, and harvesting, and again, focus periods and turning points. So that's for next time. And now for a little, how do you call it, promotion. I offer these kind of readings also for people who want to have a consultation with me about this method, and I will present it in the way I'm doing now. You get a neat PowerPoint. We do it in a Zoom meeting, and of course you can have input in that Zoom meeting, and we will exchange experiences, and well, you can have a nice reading of your own chart. So thank you, Holly, for participating, and well, I hope we can have a nice next one. So
yeah, I look forward to that one. That should be very interesting for people.
Thank you.
I think.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now I will stop.